Montana Territory, 1872. The last light of day painted the vast rangeland in gold, catching on the weathered fence posts of the Double X Ranch like fire. Zachary Xavier stood on his porch, barely 24 years old and already carrying the weight of an empire on his shoulders. His chestnut hair ruffled in the evening breeze as his green eyes surveyed what was now his 3,000 acres of prime grazing land, 100 head of cattle, a sturdy ranch house, and 2 children who needed far more than he knew how to give. Pa would have known what to do, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. 3 months since the fever had taken both his parents, leaving him with a prosperous ranch, a 7-year-old brother, and a 5-year-old sister who barely spoke anymore. The vastness of Montana stretched before him, beautiful and unforgiving, much like the task ahead. Inside, little Emma was curled on the settee, clutching the rag doll their mother had made her. Thomas sat at the table, struggling through a primer with determination etched on his young face. Zachary's chest tightened. They deserved better than what he could offer. A young rancher who could break a wild horse but couldn't soothe a nightmare or teach letters beyond the basics. "We need help," he admitted aloud, startling Thomas from his concentration. "Are you sending us away?" the boy asked, eyes wide with fear. "Never," Zachary promised fiercely, crouching to meet his brother's eyes. "But I aim to bring someone here. Someone who can teach you proper, the way Ma always wanted." Later that night, after the children were asleep, Zachary penned a letter to the school board in Helena. The ranch's prosperity meant he could offer a generous salary, room and board, and a chance for some qualified teacher to escape the crowded classrooms of town. What he couldn't put into words was the desperation behind the offer, the fear that he was failing the 2 small people who depended on him. How could he know that 50 miles away in Helena, his letter would fall into the hands of a young woman whose own desperation matched his own? Dorothy June clutched the crumpled letter to her chest, ignoring the disapproving glance from Mrs. Withers across the boarding house dining table. At 22, with copper-red hair pulled back in a severe bun and wearing her one good dress, navy blue wool that had been let out twice, she hardly cut the figure of a successful teacher. A private position? Out on some ranch. Mrs. Withers sniffed. Hardly suitable for a young lady of breeding. A young lady of breeding wouldn't be 3 months behind on her board, Dorothy replied with more frankness than wisdom. Besides, Mr. Xavier mentions his younger siblings need education. It's respectable work. What she didn't say was that the school board had made it clear her position wouldn't be renewed. Too many complaints about her progressive teaching methods, her insistence that girls could learn arithmetic just as well as boys, her refusal to use the rod, even when Superintendent Morrison insisted some children needed firm correction. The letter mentions a housekeeper already employed, Dorothy continued, scanning the neat handwriting. And the salary is, well, it's more than double what I make now. That night, Dorothy composed her reply by candlelight, her hands trembling slightly. This wasn't just about employment, it was salvation. Her small trunk contained little enough, books mostly, a few dresses, her mother's cameo brooch, the sum total of a life that had brought her west with dreams of independence. Dreams that were fading faster than the candle's flame. What she couldn't know was how much rode on her decision, or how the young rancher who had written that letter would change her life forever. The stagecoach rattled to a stop before the general store in Copper Creek, a settlement barely substantial enough to warrant a name. Dorothy stepped down, wincing as her feet touched solid ground after the 8-hour journey from Helena. Her navy traveling dress was coated with a fine layer of dust, her hair escaping its pins in wispy tendrils. She clutched her small valise and peered around uncertainly. "Miss June." She turned to find herself looking at a young man who seemed too youthful to be the ranch owner she'd corresponded with. He stood beside a wagon, tall and broad-shouldered, his white shirt rolled up at the sleeves to reveal sun-bronzed forearms. His chestnut hair curled slightly at his collar, and his clean-shaven face bore the healthy tan of someone who lived outdoors. Not what she had expected at all. "Mr. Xavier?" she asked, surprised by the flutter in her chest. He stepped forward, removing his hat. "Zachary Xavier. Welcome to Copper Creek." He gestured to the wagon. "I apologize for not having a proper carriage. The ranch is about 5 miles out." As he helped her up to the wagon seat, Dorothy caught the scent of saddle leather and soap. His hand was calloused but gentle, and when their eyes met briefly, she noted they were green, clear as spring water, and just as refreshing in this dusty town. "I trust your journey was comfortable?" he asked as he flicked the reins, setting the horses in motion. "As comfortable as one might expect," she replied diplomatically. In truth, she had spent most of the journey wedged between a corpulent merchant and a woman with 3 squalling children. "The children are excited to meet you," Zachary said after a moment. "Thomas has been counting down the days. Emma, well, Emma hasn't spoken much since our parents passed." The casual mention of orphaned children caught Dorothy off guard. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Xavier." He nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. "Thank you. It's been 3 months now. I'm managing the ranch well enough, but the children need more than I can give them." As the wagon rumbled along the dirt road, Dorothy found herself studying her new employer. His hands were sure on the reins, and despite his youth, there was something solid about him, something trustworthy. Yet beneath that strength, she sensed uncertainty, perhaps even fear. "I should warn you," he continued. "The ranch is prosperous, but we're not fancy folk. My father built it from nothing, and I intend to honor his legacy." "I don't require fancy, Mr. Xavier," Dorothy replied. "Only honesty and respect." He turned to look at her then, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of one. What neither of them could have guessed was how much that understanding would be tested in the coming months, or how deeply their lives would become entwined. The Double X Ranch sprawled across a gentle slope, the main house constructed of solid logs with a wide front porch. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, a barn, bunkhouse, smokehouse, and what appeared to be a workshop. Beyond stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed in the afternoon sun. As the wagon approached, 2 small figures appeared on the porch. The boy waved enthusiastically while the little girl clung to the porch post, half hidden. "There they are," Zachary said, a smile warming his features. "Thomas is 7, smart as a whip. Emma's 5. She was always shy, but since Ma and Pa, well, she hardly speaks at all." Dorothy felt her heart constrict. "Children are remarkably resilient, Mr. Xavier. With patience and care, I believe Emma will find her voice again." The wagon pulled up before the house, and Thomas bounded down the steps. "Is this her? Is this our teacher?" he demanded, studying Dorothy with frank curiosity. "Thomas, mind your manners," Zachary chided gently, helping Dorothy down. "Miss June, this is my brother Thomas, and that shy little miss on the porch is Emma." Dorothy crouched to Thomas's level. "I'm very pleased to meet you, Thomas. I hear you're quite the scholar already." The boy puffed up with pride. "I can read most of my primer, and I know my numbers to 100. "Impressive." Dorothy smiled, then looked up at Emma. "And hello to you, Miss Emma. I've brought something you might like." She opened her valise and withdrew a small rag doll, similar to the one the girl clutched but newer. "This is Clara." She was feeling lonely and hoped to find a friend. Emma's eyes widened, but she didn't move from her spot. Dorothy didn't push. Instead, she placed the doll on the porch step. "Clara can wait until you're ready." A plump woman with iron-gray hair emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "So you're the teacher, then? I'm Mrs. Peterson, housekeeper and cook. Hope you're hungry. Supper's nearly ready." "Mrs. Peterson has been a godsend," Zachary explained. "She came to help when my mother fell ill and stayed on." Inside, the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable. A large central room served as both parlor and dining area, with a massive stone fireplace dominating one wall. The furnishings were solid and functional rather than fashionable, but everything was clean and well-maintained. Dorothy noted a small bookshelf with a modest collection, mostly practical manuals on ranching and a few well-worn novels. "Your room is this way," Zachary said, leading her down a short hallway. "It was my parents'. We cleared it out. I hope it's suitable." The bedroom was spacious by Dorothy's standards, with a large 4-poster bed, washstand, wardrobe, and a small writing desk positioned beneath the window. Simple curtains of blue-checked gingham framed a view of the pastures. "It's lovely," Dorothy said sincerely. "Far more than I expected." Zachary lingered in the doorway, a slight flush on his cheeks. "The children's rooms are across the hall. Mine's at the end. Mrs. Peterson has the room off the kitchen." He hesitated. "I should let you get settled before supper." Alone, Dorothy sat on the edge of the bed, taking in her new surroundings. The room smelled of lavender and beeswax polish. Someone, Mrs. Peterson, most likely, had made an effort to make it welcoming. Yet Dorothy couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into a void left by someone deeply missed. On the writing desk sat a small slate and several pieces of chalk, a thoughtful touch for a teacher. But beside it lay something unexpected, a worn leather-bound journal, its pages blank except for a simple inscription on the first page. For thoughts too precious to fade. ZX. Dorothy traced the letters with her fingertip, wondering about the young rancher who had hired her. What kind of man was he, beyond the responsibilities that weighed on his broad shoulders? And why did her heart quicken when their eyes met? Questions she had no business asking herself on her first day of employment. Supper was a quiet affair at first. Thomas peppered Dorothy with questions about Helena and books and whether she knew how to ride a horse, but Emma remained silent, pushing food around her plate, while Zachary and Mrs. Peterson exchanged concerned glances. Miss June will start your lessons tomorrow, Zachary told the children. I've cleared out the old storeroom off the parlor. It should make a suitable schoolroom. Will we have to sit in rows like in town? Thomas asked with evident distaste. Dorothy smiled. I believe with just 2 students, we can arrange ourselves comfortably without strict rows. Education should be engaging, not merely endured. Zachary raised an eyebrow. Is that why you left the school in Helena, Miss June? Different ideas about education? She hesitated, surprised by his perceptiveness. Let's just say the superintendent and I had philosophical differences about teaching methods. She means they was old-fashioned stick-in-the-muds, Mrs. Peterson interjected, setting down a berry cobbler with authority. Can tell that much just from your letters, miss. Got spirit, you do. Dorothy felt her cheeks warm. I simply believe children learn better when encouraged rather than intimidated. Hear that, Thomas? No ruler across the knuckles for you. Zachary teased, then grew serious. Our mother taught us before she fell ill. She was gentle but firm. I'd like that approach continued. After the meal, while Mrs. Peterson shooed the children off to wash up before bed, Zachary invited Dorothy to the porch to discuss her duties. The evening air had cooled, and stars were beginning to appear in the vast Montana sky. Dorothy wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she settled into one of the wooden rocking chairs. I've never done this before, Zachary admitted, leaning against the porch rail. In the fading light, his profile was strong yet vulnerable. Hiring someone, I mean. Running the ranch is straightforward enough. I've been doing that alongside my father since I was 14. But the children, they need more than I know how to give. What are your expectations for their education? Dorothy asked. I want them prepared for whatever life they choose, he answered thoughtfully. Thomas should know enough to run this place someday if he wants, or study law or medicine if that's his calling. And Emma. His voice softened. I want her to have choices my mother never had. To be strong and independent. Dorothy couldn't hide her surprise. That's progressive thinking, Mr. Xavier. A half-smile touched his lips. My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father. She never regretted her choice, but she always said knowledge gives freedom. He looked directly at Dorothy then. I think that's why your letter stood out. You wrote about teaching children to think, not just recite. The conversation shifted to practical matters, hours for lessons, available materials, the children's previous education. As they talked, Dorothy found herself drawn to this young rancher who carried such responsibility with a combination of strength and humility. One last thing, Zachary said as they prepared to go inside. Sunday afternoons are yours to do as you please. Mrs. Peterson can watch the children if you'd like to ride into town or whatever ladies enjoy doing with their free time. Thank you. That's generous. He shrugged. Everyone needs time to themselves. Even teachers. As Dorothy prepared for bed that night, the house settling into creaks and sighs around her, she wondered what she had gotten herself into. The position seemed promising, a decent salary, comfortable accommodations, and children who needed her. Yet there was something else, something unexpected in the form of a green-eyed rancher whose gaze lingered in her thoughts. This was meant to be a fresh start, a chance to practice her vocation without interference. Developing feelings for her employer would complicate everything, especially when she hadn't been entirely forthcoming about why she'd really left Helena. The first weeks at XX Ranch fell into a rhythm. Mornings were devoted to lessons in the small room Zachary had outfitted with a blackboard, 2 small desks, and bookshelves stocked with readers, primers, and even a set of encyclopedia volumes that had been his mother's pride. Afternoons included practical education, nature walks, simple science experiments, and lessons in household management from Mrs. Peterson. Thomas proved to be bright and eager, if sometimes impatient. Emma remained withdrawn but began to respond in small ways. A nod, a shake of the head, occasionally a whispered word when only Dorothy could hear. One afternoon, while Thomas was helping Mrs. Peterson gather eggs, Dorothy sat on a blanket under an oak tree with Emma, reading aloud from The Secret Garden. The little girl leaned against her side, her doll, both the new Clara and her mother's creation, clutched to her chest. "Miss June." The whisper was so soft Dorothy almost missed it. "Yes, Emma," she answered, careful not to show too much excitement at this rare speech. Do you think Mama can see me from heaven?" Dorothy's heart constricted. She set the book aside and gently turned Emma to face her. "I believe your mother watches over you every day, sweetheart, and I think she's very proud of how brave you're being." Tears welled in the child's blue eyes. "I'm afraid I'll forget her voice." "Oh, Emma." Dorothy gathered the small girl into her arms. "Memories of people we love are like stars. Sometimes clouds cover them for a while, but they're always there, shining." Neither of them noticed Zachary standing at the edge of the yard, hat in hand, watching the exchange with an expression that mingled grief and gratitude in equal measure. That evening after the children were asleep, Dorothy was startled by a knock at her bedroom door. She opened it to find Zachary standing there, an uncertain look on his face. "I apologize for disturbing you," he said quickly. I wanted to thank you. Mrs. Peterson told me Emma spoke to you today. She's worried about forgetting her mother," Dorothy explained. "It's a common fear for children who've lost parents." Zachary nodded, his throat working. "I've been so focused on keeping the ranch going, on making sure they're fed and clothed and safe. I don't know how to help them with their grief." "You're doing better than you think, Mr. Xavier. Children need stability most of all, and you've provided that." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Dorothy had come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "Would you call me Zachary? At least when the children aren't present." "Mr. Xavier was my father, and every time I hear it, I look around expecting to see him." The request surprised her, crossing a line of formality she hadn't expected to breach. That would be unconventional. "So is a 24-year-old rancher raising 2 children," he countered with a sad smile. "I think we're past convention, Miss June." "Then you must call me Dorothy." Something shifted between them in that moment. A small but significant realignment, like a key turning in a lock. "Good night, Dorothy," he said, her name sounding different in his deep voice. "And thank you." As she closed the door, Dorothy pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat quicken. This was dangerous territory. She knew better than to form attachments that could compromise her position. Yet there was something about Zachary Xavier that made her want to lower her carefully constructed defenses. What she didn't know was that her presence was having an equally unsettling effect on the young rancher, or that forces beyond the ranch were conspiring to test them both in ways neither could anticipate. Special delivery for Xavier. The call came from the yard, followed by the sound of hoofbeats. Dorothy looked up from the letter she was writing to her former colleague in Helena. Through the window, she could see a rider dismounting, a young man in the dust-covered uniform of the Territorial Postal Service. Zachary emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Little far from your usual route, aren't you, Billy?" The postal rider handed over a thick envelope. "This came special from back east. Figured it might be important, so I made the detour." Dorothy watched as Zachary examined the envelope, his expression changing from curiosity to wariness. He thanked the rider, offered him water for his horse, then stood in the yard staring at the letter long after Billy had departed. That evening, Zachary was unusually quiet at supper. The children chatted about their lessons. Even Emma had begun participating more in recent days, but their brother seemed lost in thought, responding with distracted nods. After the children were in bed, Dorothy found him on the porch, a glass of whiskey in his hand and the opened letter on the table beside him. "Is everything all right?" she asked, hesitating at the threshold. He looked up, seeming to return from far away. "Just business matters. Nothing for you to worry about." But something in his tone made her doubt his casual dismissal. "I've found that burdens are lighter when shared," she offered carefully. Zachary sighed, gesturing to the chair beside him. When she sat, he handed her the letter. It's from my father's former business partner in Boston, a man named Harrison Caldwell. Dorothy scanned the elegant handwriting, her eyes widening. He's offering to buy the ranch for a considerable sum. Caldwell invested in my father's early cattle ventures, Zachary explained. They parted ways when Pa decided to settle here permanently instead of returning east. Now Caldwell's son has taken over the family business and wants to expand westward. He took a swallow of whiskey. This is the third offer in 6 months, each one higher than the last. You're not considering accepting, are you? Zachary stared out at the darkened ranch. It's enough money to move us all back east. The children could have the best education, opportunities one can't give them here. Emma could see doctors who might help her speak more freely. But this is their home, Dorothy protested. They're beginning to heal here. He turned to look at her, his green eyes troubled. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being selfish, keeping them here because it's what I want, not what's best for them. Dorothy placed her hand on his arm before she could think better of it. Zachary, I've taught children from wealthy families in Helena. Fine clothes and fancy schools don't make for happiness. Love and security do. You've given them both. He looked down at her hand on his arm, then covered it with his own. Having you here has made all the difference. For them, and for me. The night was still around them. The only sounds the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. Dorothy knew she should withdraw her hand, maintain the proper distance between employer and employee. Instead, she found herself turning her palm upward, her fingers intertwining with his. I should go inside, she whispered, but made no move to leave. You should, he agreed, his voice low. For a moment, something electric hovered between them. Possibility, danger, promise. Then the sound of Emma's crying broke the spell. Zachary released her hand immediately, rising to his feet. Nightmare, he explained. She has them sometimes. Dorothy nodded, grateful for the interruption even as part of her regretted it. Good night, then. Later, lying awake in her bed, Dorothy tried to make sense of what had nearly happened. She'd come to Double X Ranch to escape complications, not create new ones. Getting involved with Zachary would jeopardize everything. Her position, her reputation, perhaps even her heart. But as sleep finally claimed her, it wasn't professional concerns that filled her dreams, but the memory of strong fingers entwined with hers and green eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully maintained facade. The next morning, Dorothy was helping Emma practice her letters when she noticed a cloud of dust approaching from the direction of town. Minutes later, a smart buggy pulled by a matched pair of bays rolled into the yard. A woman stepped down before Zachary could emerge from the barn to greet the visitor. Tall and elegantly dressed in a traveling suit of burgundy wool, she surveyed the ranch with obvious distaste before turning her gaze to the porch where Dorothy and Emma stood. You must be the governess, she said, her Boston accent crisp as she mounted the steps. I am Vivian Caldwell. Where might I find Mr. Xavier? Before Dorothy could respond, Zachary appeared from the barn, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness as he recognized their visitor. Miss Caldwell, this is unexpected. Zachary, how wonderful to see you again after all these years. Vivian Caldwell extended a gloved hand with practiced grace. When Father mentioned he was corresponding with you, I simply had to accompany him on his business trip to Helena. Dorothy felt Emma press against her skirts, suddenly shy again. She placed a protective hand on the child's shoulder. This is Miss June, our teacher, Zachary said, belatedly remembering his manners. And my sister, Emma. Dorothy, this is Miss Caldwell. Her father was my father's business associate years ago. Charmed, Vivian said with barely a glance at Dorothy. Zachary, might we speak privately? Father has asked me to convey some additional thoughts regarding his proposal. Zachary hesitated, glancing at Dorothy. Perhaps later, Miss Caldwell. I'm in the middle of ranch work, and we don't stand on ceremony here. I can see that, Vivian replied, eyeing his work clothes with a mixture of disapproval and something else. Something that made Dorothy's chest tighten inexplicably. Miss Caldwell will be staying in town, Zachary explained to Dorothy. She and her father are here for a fortnight on business. Actually, Vivian interjected with a dazzling smile. Father has taken rooms at the hotel, but I was hoping for something more authentic. I've always been fascinated by ranch life. She turned the full force of her attention on Zachary. I had hoped you might offer hospitality, for the sake of our family's long association. Dorothy saw the conflict play across Zachary's face, his natural courtesy warring with obvious reluctance. "We have a spare room," he finally conceded. "Mrs. Peterson can prepare it for you. But I should warn you, life here is far from the comforts you're accustomed to in Boston." "I'm sure it will be educational," Vivian replied, casting a sideways glance at Dorothy that communicated volumes. That evening, Vivian Caldwell dominated the supper table with tales of Boston society, theater performances, and the latest fashions. Thomas was entranced, especially by her descriptions of steam locomotives and ocean liners. Even Emma seemed fascinated, though she remained silent. "Of course, Boston has excellent schools," Vivian remarked, directing her comments to Zachary. "Your brother and sister would have every advantage there. I'm sure Miss June does her best, but there's no substitute for proper educational institutions." Dorothy kept her expression neutral as she helped Emma cut her meat. Every educational approach has its merits. Some children thrive in formal settings, while others benefit from individualized attention. "How progressive," Vivian replied with a thin smile. "Though I imagine opportunities for advancement are limited out here for someone in your profession." The conversation continued in this vein, with Vivian extolling the virtues of Eastern civilization while subtly undermining the worth of ranch life. Dorothy noticed Zachary growing increasingly quiet, a muscle working in his jaw. After the children were in bed, Dorothy retired to her room early, unwilling to watch Vivian's obvious campaign to charm Zachary. Through her partially open window, she could hear their voices on the porch, Vivian's musical laugh, Zachary's deeper tones. Their conversation drifted up in fragments. "Ridiculous to bury yourself out here. My responsibility to the children. Bring them with you, of course. Father's offer is more than generous." Dorothy moved away from the window, her chest tight with an emotion she refused to name. She had no claim on Zachary Xavier. If he chose to sell the ranch and return east, perhaps with a sophisticated Boston wife on his arm, that was his affair. She would simply need to find another position. The thought left her feeling hollow. A soft knock at her door startled her from these troubling reflections. She opened it to find Zachary standing there, looking weary but determined. "May I speak with you?" he asked quietly. Dorothy hesitated, conscious of her informal state. Hair loose around her shoulders, wearing only her dress without its usual collar and cuffs. But something in his expression made her step aside to admit him. "I apologize for Miss Caldwell's behavior," he said without preamble. "She was always rather direct, even as a girl." "You knew her when you were younger?" Dorothy tried to keep her tone neutral. Zachary nodded, remaining near the door as if afraid to venture further into her private space. "Our families had business dealings. We spent summers together when I was a boy, and my father still traveled east regularly." He ran a hand through his hair. "I believe her father harbors hopes of a match between us. It would simplify the business arrangement he's proposing." "And what do you hope for?" The question escaped before Dorothy could think better of it. Zachary's gaze met hers, intense and searching. "Not that. Never that." He took a step closer. "Dorothy, I need to ask something of you." Her heart quickened. "Yes. While the Caldwells are here, they'll be watching, evaluating. Not just the ranch, but how we live. How the children are progressing." His expression grew troubled. "I need them to see that we're thriving here. That selling isn't necessary." Understanding dawned. "You want me to make sure the children present well." "I want you to be yourself," he corrected. "The teacher who's brought my sister's voice back. Who's made my brother excited about learning instead of resenting it." He hesitated. "I just wanted you to understand what's at stake. This isn't just about land or money. It's about our future." The word, our, hung between them, ambiguous yet weighted with significance. "I understand," Dorothy said softly. "The children and I will continue as always. Mr. Caldwell will see exactly what this ranch provides for them." Relief washed over Zachary's features. "Thank you." He moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I meant what I said downstairs. You've done more for Thomas and Emma in 2 months than I could have hoped for." After he left, Dorothy sat on the edge of her bed, troubled by the conversation. Zachary clearly wanted to keep the ranch, to raise the children here. Yet Vivian Caldwell's presence complicated matters in ways Dorothy hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the business proposition that concerned her. It was the way Vivian looked at Zachary, with the confident entitlement of a woman accustomed to getting what she wanted. And what she clearly wanted was the handsome young rancher. Dorothy had no right to feel the jealousy that twisted in her stomach. Yet as she finally lay down to sleep, she couldn't banish the image of Vivian's perfectly gloved hand resting on Zachary's arm, or the fear that the Caldwells' visit might change everything. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Dorothy rose early, taking extra care with her appearance. Her wardrobe was limited, but she selected her best day dress, a slate blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and arranged her copper hair in a style more elaborate than her usual simple bun. When she entered the kitchen, Mrs. Peterson gave her an approving once-over. "Looking fine this morning, Miss June. Not that you need to impress anybody," she added with a knowing look. Dorothy felt her cheeks warm. "I simply thought, with guests in the house." The housekeeper didn't sound convinced. "Well, our Boston visitor is still Abed. Says she never rises before 9 in civilized society." She snorted. Meanwhile, Mr. Zachary's been up since dawn, seeing to the cattle with the hands. "And the children?" "Thomas is helping muck out stalls, earning his penny for the week. Emma's on the back porch, watching the chickens." Dorothy found the little girl sitting with her dolls, conducting an elaborate tea party with imaginary guests. She looked up as Dorothy approached. "Miss June, will you join us? Clara says you make the best pretend tea." Dorothy's heart swelled at these words, the longest sentence Emma had spoken since her arrival. "I would be honored," she said, settling beside the child on the rough wooden boards. They were thus engaged when Vivian Caldwell emerged, dressed in a morning gown that would have been more appropriate for a Boston parlor than a Montana ranch. "How domestic," she observed, watching their play. Though perhaps arithmetic or geography might be more educational than serving imaginary tea. Before Dorothy could respond, Emma surprised them both. "We're learning fractions," she said clearly. "Half a cup, quarter cup. And geography, too. Clara comes from Boston like you, but she likes Montana better." Vivian's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "I see." Dorothy bit back a smile. "We integrate practical lessons throughout the day." Emma is quite right. Measurement is mathematics, and understanding where people come from is geography. "How innovative," Vivian replied, her tone making it clear this wasn't a compliment. "I was just about to take a turn about the property. Perhaps you'd join me, Miss June? I'd love to hear more about your educational philosophy." It was clearly not a request Dorothy could refuse. As they walked along the fence line overlooking the pastures, Vivian maintained a running commentary on the primitive conditions, the isolation, and the limited future such a place offered. "Of course, I understand the appeal for someone like Zachary," she said. "Men enjoy playing the frontier hero. But surely you must find it limiting, Miss June? An educated woman such as yourself, buried in the wilderness with no society, no culture." "I find purpose here," Dorothy replied evenly. "The children are flourishing. There's value in that which can't be measured against opera houses or museums." Vivian paused, turning to face her directly. "Let us be frank, Miss June. You seem an intelligent woman. Surely you can see that Zachary and those children belong in civilization, not this backwater. The ranch is profitable, yes, but my father offers enough to set them up handsomely in Boston. Zachary could join our family business. The children would have the finest tutors, entree into the best society. And what role do you envision for yourself in this plan?" Dorothy asked, unable to keep a slight edge from her voice. A knowing smile curved Vivian's lips. "An advantageous match between our families has always been a possibility. Zachary has grown into quite the specimen, hasn't he? A bit rough around the edges, but nothing that can't be polished. He's not a horse to be broken to bridle, Miss Caldwell. No? Every man can be led, Miss June. It's simply a matter of finding the right inducement." Vivian adjusted her parasol. "My father arrives tomorrow. He'll make the final offer then, one too generous to refuse. I suggest you begin considering your next position." As they returned to the house, Dorothy spotted Zachary in the corral, working with a spirited young horse. His movements were confident and gentle, his focus absolute. Seeing him in his element, she couldn't imagine him confined to a Boston counting house, reduced to a specimen to be polished. Yet she also recognized the truth in Vivian's assessment. The Caldwells could offer the children advantages that ranch life could not: formal education, cultural opportunities, connections that would serve them throughout their lives. Was it right for her to hope Zachary would refuse? More troubling still was the realization that her concern went beyond professional interest in the children's welfare. Somewhere along the way, her feelings for Zachary Xavier had deepened into something dangerous, something that clouded her judgment and threatened her independence. That evening, Mr. Caldwell arrived, a distinguished gentleman with silver hair and the confident bearing of wealth. He greeted Dorothy politely but dismissively, his attention focused on Zachary and the children. "Fine youngsters," he pronounced after dinner, watching Thomas demonstrate a rope trick he'd learned from one of the ranch hands. "They do well at Westfield Academy. My own son's attended, you know. Best preparation for Harvard one could ask for." "Thomas enjoys practical learning," Zachary replied. "He helps with the cattle already." Caldwell waved this away. "Boyhood enthusiasms. What he needs is classical education, mathematics, Latin, preparation for a gentleman's life." "And what about what he wants?" Dorothy couldn't help asking. The older man regarded her with surprise, as if a piece of furniture had suddenly spoken. "Children rarely know what's best for them, Miss June. That's why adults make such decisions." After the children were in bed, Caldwell invited Zachary to his room to discuss business. Dorothy found herself alone in the parlor with Vivian, an awkward silence stretching between them. "He'll accept, you know," Vivian finally said, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "Men like Zachary may play at being rugged individualists, but they understand advantage when they see it." "You don't know him at all if you believe that," Dorothy replied, setting aside her mending. Vivian's smile was cold. "And you think you do? After what, 2 months? I've known Zachary Xavier since we were children. Our fathers always intended an alliance between our families. People aren't chess pieces to be moved according to strategy, aren't they?" Vivian leaned forward. "Tell me, Miss June, what future do you imagine here? Do you think he'll marry his children's governess like some romantic novel? A man of his means, his position?" The words struck with precision, targeting doubts Dorothy had tried to suppress. "Mr. Xavier's decisions are his own affair. I'm employed to teach his siblings, nothing more." "Of course," Vivian agreed with false sympathy. "How noble. Sacrificing your own happiness for the children's welfare. Though I wonder if they'd be better served by opportunities in the East than by your devoted instruction." Before Dorothy could form a retort, the door to Caldwell's room opened, and both men emerged. Zachary's expression was unreadable, but there was a stiffness to his shoulders that suggested tension. "Miss Caldwell, it's been a long day," he said formally. "Perhaps we should all retire." Dorothy lay awake long into the night, Vivian's words echoing in her mind. What right did she have to hope Zachary would refuse an offer that might benefit the children? And what future could she possibly have here, other than as an employee? She had come to Double X Ranch seeking refuge, not attachment. Yet somehow, this place, these people, had become more than an employer, more than pupils. They had become something dangerously close to family. Dawn was breaking when Dorothy made her decision. Whatever Zachary chose, she needed to protect herself. She would finish out the month, then find another position. Perhaps in Oregon or California, somewhere far enough that she wouldn't be tempted to look back. With that resolution, she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, unaware that across the hall, Zachary Xavier was making decisions of his own. "Missing something, Miss June?" Dorothy looked up from searching her desk drawer to find Vivian Caldwell standing in the schoolroom doorway, an expression of artificial concern on her perfect features. "I seem to have misplaced some papers," Dorothy replied neutrally. "Nothing important." "Oh, not these, then." Vivian produced a folded set of documents from her reticule. "I found them quite illuminating, especially the letter from Superintendent Morrison. Moral turpitude is such an ugly phrase, isn't it?" Dorothy's blood ran cold. The papers she'd kept hidden at the bottom of her trunk, her dismissal letter from the Helena School Board, the denouncement from Morrison, the character reference she'd forged to secure her position with Zachary. "Those are private," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Privacy is a luxury, Miss June. Or should I say Miss Johnson? That is your real name, isn't it?" Vivian stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. Dismissed for improper relations with a married board member. My. What would Zachary think of his children's moral instruction being in such compromised hands? "That is a lie," Dorothy said fiercely. "Morrison invented that charge when I refused his advances. When I threatened to expose him, he ensured no school in Helena would hire me." A compelling story. Men can be such brutes. Vivian's sympathetic tone didn't reach her calculating eyes. Unfortunately, it's your word against a respected superintendent's. And you did falsify your references to obtain this position. What do you want? Dorothy asked, though she already knew. Leave. Today. Tell Zachary you've received an urgent letter requiring your immediate departure. I'll ensure you receive 3 months' wages, enough to establish yourself elsewhere. Far elsewhere. Vivian's smile was diamond-hard. Otherwise, these documents find their way to Zachary's hands. Dorothy's mind raced. She had planned to leave anyway, but on her own terms, with proper notice. To flee suddenly would hurt the children, especially Emma, who had just begun to trust again. You really believe he'll marry you if I'm gone? She asked quietly. Something flickered in Vivian's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps. Zachary will do what's best for those children. My father's offer includes a provision for their education, their social advancement. With the right guidance, my guidance, he'll see the wisdom of accepting. And if he refuses? He won't. Vivian placed the papers on the desk. You have until this evening to pack your things and make your excuses. The stagecoach passes through town tomorrow morning. After Vivian left, Dorothy sank into her chair, the stolen papers before her. The accusations were false, but the dismissal was real, as was her deception about her identity. She had been desperate when she applied to Zachary, changing her name slightly and fabricating references to escape Morrison's vindictive influence. She'd told herself it was a small deception, justified by necessity. She was a good teacher. The children were flourishing under her care. But would Zachary see it that way? Or would he believe the worst, as so many in Helena had? Dorothy, she startled, looking up to find Zachary at the door, his expression concerned. Sorry, I didn't mean to frighten you. He stepped into the room. Mrs. Peterson said you missed breakfast. Are you unwell? Instinctively, Dorothy covered the papers with her hand. Just a headache. It's nothing. He frowned, noticing her protective gesture. What are those? Nothing important. She tried to slide the papers into her drawer, but Zachary was faster, his hand covering hers. Dorothy, what's wrong? You're pale as milk. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Dorothy knew she couldn't deceive him further. Whatever the consequences, he deserved the truth. You should read these, she said quietly, withdrawing her hand. Confusion crossed his features as he picked up the papers, but it quickly turned to something darker as he scanned their contents. His jaw tightened, a muscle working in his cheek. Is this true? He finally asked, his voice carefully controlled. Which part? That I was dismissed? Yes. That I changed my name from Johnson to June when I applied here? Yes. She raised her chin. That I had improper relations with a married man? Absolutely not. Superintendent Morrison invented that charge when I refused his advances and threatened to expose his behavior toward female teachers. Zachary was silent for a long moment, his eyes moving between the papers and her face. Why didn't you tell me this when you applied? Would you have hired me if I had? She countered. A teacher dismissed for moral turpitude, with no references except her own word? I needed this position, Zachary. I needed to get away from Helena, from Morrison's influence. He placed the papers back on the desk, his expression unreadable. Where did these come from? They weren't in the packet you sent me. Miss Caldwell found them in my trunk. She's encouraging me to leave. Immediately, understanding dawned in his eyes. I see. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Dorothy had come to recognize as a sign of internal conflict. And will you leave? The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities. I don't know, she admitted. I've thought about it. The Caldwells can offer the children advantages I can't match. Perhaps it would be best for everyone if no. The word was sharp, decisive. That's not what I asked, Dorothy. I asked what you want. What I want doesn't matter. What matters is what's best for Thomas and Emma. And you think that's the Caldwells' offer? Boston society and fancy schools. Isn't it? She challenged. They'd have opportunities here they'll never have. Culture, education, connections. At what cost? Zachary stepped closer. Their home, their freedom, the life my parents built for them. His voice softened. You. The word hung between them, charged with meaning. Dorothy's heart stuttered. Zachary, I. A knock at the door interrupted whatever she might have said. Mrs. Peterson poked her head in, her expression apologetic. Mr. Xavier, Mr. Caldwell, is asking for you. Says it's urgent business. Zachary didn't move, his eyes still fixed on Dorothy's face. Tell him I'll be there shortly. When they were alone again, he picked up the damning papers and deliberately tore them in half, then in quarters. Whatever you did or didn't do in Helena doesn't change what I've seen with my own eyes these past months. You're the best thing that's happened to those children since we lost our parents. He hesitated, then added more quietly, and to me. Before Dorothy could respond, he was gone, leaving her with the torn remnants of her past and a future suddenly, terrifyingly uncertain. The confrontation came at dinner. Mr. Caldwell had spent the day with Zachary, touring the ranch property, discussing figures and projections. Now, over Mrs. Peterson's roast beef, he made his final pitch. $100,000, he announced, setting down his fork. Cash payment, plus a 5% interest in my shipping company. It's more than generous, Zachary. Your father would have jumped at such an offer. Dorothy watched Zachary's face carefully. He showed no reaction beyond a slight tightening around his eyes. It's very generous, he agreed. But as I explained this afternoon, the ranch isn't for sale. Vivian made a small sound of disbelief. Zachary, be reasonable. Think of what this means for Thomas and Emma. I am thinking of them. His voice was calm but firm. This is their home, their legacy. I won't sell it out from under them. Mr. Caldwell leaned forward. Young man, I understand sentimentality. But business is business. This land will increase in value, certainly. But nothing like the opportunities my offer provides. Security for your siblings. Entree into society. The chance to be more than a cattle rancher. Something flashed in Zachary's eyes at the slight. My father taught me that a man's worth isn't measured by his social connections or the cut of his coat, Mr. Caldwell. It's measured by his word, his work, and how he cares for those dependent on him. Admirable frontier philosophy, Caldwell replied with a tight smile. But the world is changing. The future belongs to men of business, of education, not cowboys. Then I'll make sure Thomas and Emma have that education right here, Zachary countered. Miss June has already accomplished wonders with them. Vivian's laugh held an edge of desperation. A disgraced schoolteacher? Really, Zachary? We know all about Miss June and her dismissal from Helena. Is that the moral example you want for your siblings? Dorothy felt the blood drain from her face as all eyes turned to her. That's enough, Vivian, Zachary said sharply. No, let her speak, Mr. Caldwell interjected. What's this about Miss June? Vivian's smile was venomous. She was dismissed for improper relations with a school board member. Changed her name to hide her past. Isn't that right, Miss Johnson? The silence around the table was absolute. Even Mrs. Peterson had stopped her usual bustling to stare. Miss June has my complete confidence, Zachary said into the silence. Whatever happened in Helena is her business, not yours. Good heavens, boy. Are you blind? Caldwell exploded. The woman is clearly using her influence over you to maintain her position. Why else would you refuse such an offer? Dorothy couldn't bear it another moment. She placed her napkin beside her plate and stood. Excuse me, she managed, and fled the dining room. In her room, she moved with purposeful haste, pulling her trunk from under the bed and throwing open her wardrobe. She would not stay to be the subject of gossip and speculation. She would not be the reason Zachary rejected an opportunity that could benefit the children. She was halfway through packing when her door burst open without a knock. Zachary stood there, his face flushed with anger. What are you doing? He demanded. What does it look like? I'm leaving. She continued folding a dress, refusing to meet his eyes. The hell you are. He strode across the room and placed his hand over hers, stilling her movements. You're running away. I'm being practical, she snapped, finally looking up at him. The Caldwells won't stop. They'll spread rumors, use my past against you. Eventually, people will talk. It could affect the children. I don't give a damn what people say, Zachary growled. And neither should you. That's easy for you to say. You're not the one whose reputation is in tatters. You're not the one who had to flee one town already because of vicious lies. To her horror, tears welled in her eyes. I won't be the reason you lose this opportunity. The children deserve better. Stop telling me what my brother and sister deserve, he said, his voice suddenly gentle. I know them better than anyone, and I know what they need. He took her hand. They need you, Dorothy. We all do. The sincerity in his eyes undid her. A sob escaped her throat as the careful walls she'd built around her heart began to crumble. Zachary, please. Don't make this harder. I'm not letting you leave, he said simply. Not like this. Not because of Caldwell's manipulations or Vivian's jealousy. Jealousy, Dorothy repeated, confused. A rueful smile touched his lips. Vivian has had her sights set on me since we were 16. Her father has been trying to negotiate a merger through marriage for years. He shook his head. But I never wanted that life. And I certainly never wanted her. Hope fluttered in Dorothy's chest, dangerous and fragile. What do you want, then? His gaze held hers, unwavering. This ranch. My family. A future built on honest work, not social climbing. He hesitated, then added softly. And you, Dorothy. I want you. Time seemed to stop as his words hung in the air between them. Then, with a courage born of desperation, Dorothy closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his. For one terrible moment, he was still. Then his arms came around her, pulling her closer as he returned her kiss with a passion that left no room for doubt. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. Not as the children's teacher. As my wife. Joy and disbelief warred within her. Zachary, you can't mean. A commotion from downstairs interrupted her response. Raised voices, the sound of breaking glass. What on earth? Zachary released her reluctantly, moving toward the door. They descended the stairs to find chaos in the parlor. Mr. Caldwell was red-faced with fury, clutching a brandy glass that had clearly been refilled several times. Vivian stood beside him, her usual composure shattered, tears streaming down her perfect face. Mrs. Peterson hovered in the doorway, wringing her hands in distress. There you are, Caldwell bellowed when he spotted Zachary. Throwing away your future for what? Pride? Stubbornness? Or is it her? He jabbed a finger toward Dorothy. Has she bewitched you with her feminine wiles? That's enough, Mr. Caldwell, Zachary said, his voice dangerously quiet. You're drunk, and you're upsetting my household. I think it's time you and Miss Caldwell returned to town. We're offering you civilization, boy. Culture. Position. Everything your father wanted for you. My father wanted me to be my own man, Zachary replied evenly. To make my own choices. And I choose this ranch. These children. This life. Vivian made a sound of despair. Because of her? A disgraced nobody. Dorothy flinched at the words, but Zachary's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Miss June is the woman I intend to marry, he said with quiet certainty. If she'll have me. The silence that followed this declaration was absolute. Even Caldwell seemed momentarily stunned. You can't be serious, Vivian finally whispered. Zachary, think of your position, your name. My name is mine to give to whom I choose, he interrupted. And my position is here, on this ranch, with the family I love. Mr. Caldwell set down his glass with deliberate care. I see we've wasted our time. Come, Vivian. We're leaving. But father, now Vivian. His tone brooked no argument. As Zachary showed them out, Dorothy stood rooted to the spot, her mind whirling. Had he truly just announced his intention to marry her? In the heat of the moment, facing down the Caldwells? Or did he mean it? When he returned from seeing the visitors to their carriage, his expression was unreadable. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she now recognized as nervousness rather than frustration. I apologize for that scene, he said. And for speaking on your behalf without consulting you first. Did you mean it? Dorothy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He crossed to her in 3 long strides, taking her hands in his. Every word. I love you, Dorothy. I think I have since the day you arrived and faced down this ranch with your chin held high and determination in your eyes. I love how you are with the children, how you've brought life back into this house. He took a deep breath. But if you don't feel the same, if you need time, or if, she silenced him with a finger to his lips. I love you too, she said simply. I tried not to. I told myself it was wrong, that I should keep my distance. But I couldn't help it. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. He gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his exuberance. Mr. Xavier. Mrs. Peterson's scandalized voice broke into their moment of joy. There are children in this house. They turned to find the housekeeper standing in the hallway, her hands on her hips, but a smile twitching at the corners of her mouth. Children who should be in bed, Zachary agreed, setting Dorothy down gently. But who might want to hear some good news first. Dorothy's heart swelled as she watched him bound up the stairs to fetch Thomas and Emma. Whatever the future held, whatever challenges they might face, they would face them together, as a family. Copper Creek, Montana Territory, 1875. The last light of day painted the vast rangeland in gold, catching on the white picket fence that now surrounded the Double X Ranch's main house. Dorothy Xavier stood on the porch, one hand resting on her rounded belly as she watched her husband drive the wagon up the lane, Thomas and Emma chattering excitedly beside him. 3 years had passed since the Caldwells' dramatic departure and Zachary's equally dramatic proposal. 3 years of building a life together, of weathering challenges and celebrating triumphs. The ranch had prospered under Zachary's dedicated management. Thomas, now 10, was proving himself a natural horseman with a quick mind for figures. Emma, 8 and talkative as any child her age, had developed a passion for books that matched Dorothy's own. And now, as summer faded into autumn, they awaited the newest addition to their family. "What did you bring me?" Emma called as the wagon rolled to a stop. Zachary laughed, helping his sister down. "Patience, little one. Let me help Miss June sit down first." "Mrs. Xavier," Dorothy corrected with a smile as he guided her to the porch swing. The name still gave her a thrill, even after all this time. "Forever and always," he agreed, dropping a kiss on her forehead. Thomas carried in the packages from town, supplies for the ranch, books Dorothy had ordered from back east, and a special surprise. A letter from the Territorial Education Board confirming funding for a proper schoolhouse in Copper Creek, with Dorothy named as headmistress. "Just think," Zachary said as they sat together that evening, the children already in bed. "If I'd taken Caldwell's offer, none of this would exist. The ranch, our marriage, this little one." He placed a gentle hand on her belly, where their child kicked in response. "I think about that sometimes," Dorothy admitted. "How close we came to missing all of this. If I hadn't been desperate enough to apply for this position. If I hadn't been desperate enough to hire you," he countered with a smile. "Some might call it luck, but I think it was more. Fate, maybe." She leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. Who would have thought a rich rancher hiring a poor teacher would lead to this? He chuckled, pulling her closer. "Best decision I ever made." As the stars emerged above Montana's vast sky, Dorothy thought about the journey that had brought them here, from strangers to lovers, from teacher and employer to husband and wife. Life on the frontier wasn't always easy, but it was rich with purpose and love. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "Just that some treasures can't be measured in dollars," she replied. "Some riches aren't found in bank vaults or Boston mansions." He smiled, understanding perfectly. "The truest wealth is right here," he agreed, his hand gentle on her belly where their child grew, his eyes filled with a love that no fortune could buy. And as the night settled around the Double X Ranch, Dorothy knew they had found something far more precious than any business deal or social position. They had found home, in this wild land and in each other's arms.